They say when your boyfriend cheats on you with your roommate, the smart thing is to just move out and take all the furniture. But I didn't know how literally I'd end up taking that advice until I was standing in an empty apartment at 3 in the morning, watching two people I once loved more than myself discover what betrayal actually costs. The discovery came like most devastating truths do, accidentally, when you're least prepared to handle it. I'd forgotten my laptop charger at home and doubled back from my evening class, key already sliding into the lock before I registered the sounds coming from inside. Not just any sounds. The particular rhythm of intimacy, the breathless whispers, the unmistakable creak of our bed frame, the one David and I had assembled together 6 months ago, laughing as we struggled with the instructions, him holding the headboard steady while I tightened the screws. My hand froze on the doorknob. The logical part of my brain, the part that had survived 24 years of disappointments and small heartbreaks, whispered that I should leave. Walk away. Come back later with noise, give them time to separate and lie. Preserve some dignity, some plausible deniability that might let us all pretend this never happened. But my body had other plans. The door opened anyway, my feet carrying me forward even as my chest tightened like someone was slowly turning a vise around my ribs. The hallway stretched impossibly long, each step echoing in my ears despite the carpet. I could smell her perfume. That expensive vanilla one Sarah always wore, the one I'd complimented just last week when we were getting ready to go out together. The bedroom door was ajar, and through the crack I saw them. David's back, the constellation of freckles I'd traced with my fingertips countless times. Sarah's legs wrapped around his waist, her head thrown back against my pillow, our pillow, her auburn hair fanned across the white cotton case I'd washed just yesterday. The intimacy of it was what killed me, not just the physical act but the familiarity. The way his hand tangled in her hair like he knew exactly how she liked it. The way she arched into him with a comfort that spoke of repetition, of practice, of something that had been happening for far longer than this single moment. I stood there for exactly 47 seconds. I know because I was staring at the digital clock on the nightstand, watching the red numbers change while my world collapsed in perfect numerical progression. 11:23 became 11:24, and somewhere in that minute, the person I'd been for the past 3 years, David's girlfriend, Sarah's best friend, the girl who believed in loyalty and trust and the fundamental goodness of people she loved, died completely. The rage came later. In that moment, I felt nothing but a strange, crystalline clarity. Like someone had suddenly adjusted the focus on a camera, bringing everything into sharp, brutal relief. I could see the water ring on the nightstand where David always set his coffee mug, despite my gentle reminders about coasters. I could see Sarah's clothes scattered across the floor, her bra draped over the chair where I usually threw my own clothes after long days. I could see the bottle of wine on the dresser, our anniversary wine, the one we'd been saving for something special. I backed away slowly, each step deliberate and silent. My keys didn't jingle. The door didn't creak. I was a ghost in my own apartment, watching my own life burn from the inside out. Outside, the October air hit my face like a slap, and suddenly I could breathe again. But breathing meant feeling, and feeling meant the full weight of what I'd just witnessed came crashing down. I made it exactly 3 blocks before I had to stop, doubling over next to a streetlight while my stomach tried to turn itself inside out. Nothing came up. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but my body went through the motions anyway, rejecting something it couldn't digest. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Movie night tomorrow? I found this crazy documentary about cults we have to watch together. I stared at the heart emoji until it blurred, my eyes burning. Just 3 hours ago, we'd been in the kitchen together, sharing leftover pizza and complaining about our respective relationship problems. Well, she'd been complaining about her dating app disasters while I'd been defending David's recent distraction, his late nights at work, his decreased affection. She'd listened with such convincing sympathy, even offered advice about communication and patience. The calculating bitch had been offering relationship advice about cheating with my boyfriend. That's when the rage finally came, rolling through me like a wildfire, burning away the shock and leaving something harder in its place. I walked for hours, my mind cycling through memories with new context. David's recent overtime, Sarah's mysterious good moods, the way they'd both been so encouraging about my evening classes, practically pushing me out the door. The times I'd come home to find them watching Netflix together, sitting just a little too close, turning off the TV just a little too quickly. I'd been living with my own betrayal for months, watching it unfold in my peripheral vision while they performed innocence to my face. By the time I made it back to the apartment, my apartment, the lease was in my name. It was past 2 in the morning. Sarah's car was gone. The lights were off. David was presumably asleep in our bed, in sheets that still smelled like another woman. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring up at the dark windows, feeling something cold and precise taking shape in my chest. This wasn't just heartbreak anymore. This was warfare, and they'd already been fighting it for months without bothering to tell me I was the enemy. I pulled out my phone and started making lists. The first list was practical. What I needed to do immediately to protect myself. Change passwords. Secure important documents. Figure out the lease situation. Contact my bank about our joint account. Basic damage control. The kind of things you handle when your life implodes and you need to build something new from the wreckage. The second list was more interesting. It was everything in the apartment that belonged to me, down to the smallest detail. The furniture I'd bought before we moved in together. The kitchen appliances I'd received as housewarming gifts. The artwork I'd collected over the years. The plants I'd nursed back to health. The books, the decorations, the coffee table I'd refinished myself last summer. It was a long list, longer than I'd expected. David had moved in with a suitcase and a gaming chair. Everything else, the couch, the dining table, the bedroom set, the TV stand, the bookshelves, the lamps, the kitchen table, even the bed frame we'd assembled together, had been mine from the beginning. I'd never thought about it before because I'd never needed to. When you love someone, when you're building a life together, ownership becomes fluid. What's mine is ours, what's ours is forever. But forever had an expiration date, apparently. And now I was remembering exactly what had been mine all along. The third list formed itself slowly, growing more detailed as I sat there in the dark. It wasn't about furniture anymore. It was about justice, about consequences, about making sure that actions, particularly the kinds of actions that destroy other people's lives, came with appropriate prices attached. I thought about Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her own bed, probably already planning her next performance of friendship. I thought about David, sprawled across sheets I'd bought, in a bed I'd assembled, in an apartment I'd made into a home. I thought about how they'd wake up tomorrow and continue their lies, how they'd look me in the eye and pretend to care about my feelings while actively destroying my life behind my back. The plan started simple. I would move out, yes. I would take my furniture, yes. But I would do it in a way that made a point, in a way that showed them exactly what their betrayal had cost, not just emotionally but practically, tangibly, in a way they'd have to live with every single day. I started researching moving companies that offered same-day service. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I continued living in the apartment, sleeping next to David, eating breakfast with Sarah, going through all the motions of normalcy while planning their complete upheaval. It required a level of performance I didn't know I was capable of, smiling and laughing and participating in conversations while my entire internal world had shifted into something cold and strategic. David noticed I seemed different. He asked if I was okay, if something was bothering me, his face arranged in an expression of such perfect concern that I almost admired the craftsmanship. Sarah was more direct, cornering me in the kitchen one morning to ask if I was mad at her about something. I looked at her straight in the eye. My roommate, my best friend, the woman who'd held my hair back when I was sick and borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets and lied as easily as breathing. Of course not. Why would you think that? She smiled with relief, and I realized this was probably how she'd been managing her own guilt. By checking in periodically, by maintaining the friendship, by convincing herself that as long as I seemed fine, her betrayal wasn't really hurting me. The logistics were more complicated than I'd expected. I needed to coordinate the movers, arrange temporary storage, find a new apartment, and most importantly, make sure both David and Sarah would be present for the grand finale. It required careful scheduling and subtle manipulation, but I'd always been good at organization. I'd just never used those skills for revenge before. I started working later, staying at the library until closing time to research apartments and coordinate details. David barely noticed. He was swamped at work. Again, coming home after 10 most nights, usually when Sarah was conveniently out at her book club or yoga class or whatever fictional activity she was using as cover. I wondered if they'd gotten careless because they thought they'd gotten away with it. If the thrill had worn off enough that they were taking bigger risks, meeting more often, getting sloppy with their schedules, it didn't matter. I knew now, and knowledge was power, and I intended to use that power surgically. The new apartment came together faster than I'd hoped. A one-bedroom place across town, close to campus, available immediately. The landlord was sympathetic when I explained I was dealing with a difficult roommate situation and needed to move quickly. I signed the lease on a Thursday, gave them first month's rent and deposit, and scheduled the movers for the following Tuesday. Tuesday was Sarah's only full day off work. Tuesday was when David worked from home. Tuesday was when they'd both be in the apartment, probably planning another afternoon of betrayal in my bed. I told David I had an evening class. I told Sarah I was meeting with a study group that might run late. I gave them the perfect opportunity to be together, to sink deeper into their deception, while I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. The movers arrived at exactly 9 a.m. I met them in the parking lot, keys ready, clipboard in hand with my detailed inventory list. Professional, efficient, and absolutely certain about what belonged to me. I'd spent weeks documenting everything, taking photos, checking receipts, making sure there would be no question about ownership. We need to be fast, I told them. I want everything loaded and out of here in under 3 hours. They were good at their job. The team leader took one look at my list and nodded approvingly. This wasn't their first emergency move, their first situation involving betrayal and bad blood and the need for speed. They moved through the apartment like a well-oiled machine, wrapping and loading with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice. I stood in the living room, watching them dismantle the life I'd built, and felt something like peace settle over me. The couch where David and I had watched Netflix together. The coffee table where Sarah and I had studied for finals. The bookshelf that held our combined libraries, my novels mixed with his textbooks mixed with her art books. All of it mine, all of it leaving. They wrapped the dining table carefully, the one I'd bought at an estate sale, and refinished myself. 6 months of weekends spent sanding and staining, David complaining about the smell while I worked. He'd eaten off that table every day since then, never once acknowledging the time and effort I'd put into making it beautiful. The bedroom was harder. Watching them disassemble the bed frame I'd picked out, pack up the dresser I'd inherited from my grandmother, roll up the rug I'd saved for months to buy. This had been our sanctuary, the place where we'd shared our most intimate moments, where he'd told me he loved me, where I'd believed we were building something permanent. Now it was just furniture, just objects to be wrapped and loaded and transported to a new life. The movers were loading the last of the large pieces when I heard a car in the parking lot. My heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding my system, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was the moment I'd been planning for. This was what justice looked like. David's voice in the hallway calling my name. Confusion, not panic. He thought I was in class, thought the movers were some kind of mistake or maintenance issue. The apartment door opened just as they were carrying out my grandmother's dresser. I watched his face change, confusion shifting to understanding, shifting to something approaching horror. He stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the empty living room, the boxes stacked in the hallway, the systematic dismantling of everything familiar. "What the hell is going on?" His voice cracked on the last word. I'd never heard him sound so completely lost. "I'm moving out." My own voice surprised me with its steadiness. I'd practiced this moment in my head dozens of times, but I'd expected to feel more emotional. Instead, I felt detached, clinical, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. "Moving out? What are you talking about? Why didn't you tell me? We could have discussed this, worked something out." "Discussed it?" The laugh that came out of me was sharp enough to cut glass. "Like we discussed you fucking my roommate?" The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. Behind him, I could see Sarah's car pulling into the parking lot. Perfect timing. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I know exactly what I saw." I pulled out my phone, showed him the photos I'd taken. Not of them together. I wasn't cruel enough to document their intimacy, but of the evidence they'd left behind. Sarah's earring on the nightstand, her hair tie on the bathroom counter, the wine bottle they'd opened, the one we'd been saving for our anniversary. He stared at the photos like they were written in a foreign language he couldn't quite translate. "How long?" I asked. "It's not what you think. How long, David?" Sarah appeared in the doorway behind him, took in the scene, and went completely white. At least she was smart enough not to pretend confusion. 3 months, she whispered. 3 months. A quarter of our relationship. All those nights I'd been in class, working toward a degree I'd thought would benefit our future together, they'd been here. In my apartment, in my bed, drinking my wine and laughing about how easy it was to fool me. The whole time I've been taking evening classes, it wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. She looked like she might cry, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. At least she had the decency to feel guilty. David just looked shell-shocked. "We never meant for this to happen," she started, and I held up a hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want explanations or apologies or justifications. I just want you to understand what this costs." I gestured around the apartment, at the empty spaces where my furniture had been, at the movers carrying out the last of my belongings. "This is what happens when you destroy someone's life. You lose the life they built for you." David was looking around like he was seeing the apartment for the first time. The bare walls where my artwork had hung, the empty kitchen without my appliances, the living room that was now just carpet and walls, and the gaming chair he'd brought from his old place. "You can't take everything," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "Some of this stuff we bought together." I pulled out my folder of receipts, the documentation I'd been collecting for weeks. "Show me one receipt with your name on it. One piece of furniture you actually paid for." He couldn't, of course, because there wasn't any. He'd moved into the life I'd created and made himself comfortable without ever contributing to its construction. Sarah was crying now, quiet tears that she kept wiping away with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry. You have to believe me. We never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me." I looked at both of them. These people I'd loved. These people who'd systematically destroyed my trust while living off my generosity. And now you get to live with the consequences. The movers finished loading the truck. Everything I owned, everything that had made this place a home, was now wrapped in blankets and strapped down and ready to transport to my new life. The apartment looked like a crime scene, empty and violated, all its warmth and personality stripped away. "Where will you go?" David asked. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the empty space around him. "Somewhere you'll never find me." It was dramatic, but it felt good to say. "Somewhere I can build a life with people who actually value me." I walked toward the door, pausing next to Sarah. Up close, I could see that her tears were real, that her guilt was genuine. It didn't change anything, but I noted it anyway. "I hope it was worth it," I told her quietly. "I hope 3 months of fucking my boyfriend was worth losing the best friend you'll ever have." She flinched like I'd slapped her, and maybe I had, metaphorically. Sometimes the truth was the cruelest weapon available. David followed me out to the parking lot, still trying to process what had happened. "This is insane. You're overreacting. We can fix this, we can work through it." I turned to face him one last time. This man I'd planned a future with. This man who'd shared my bed while betraying me with my best friend. "There's nothing to work through, David. There's no relationship left to fix. You destroyed it 3 months ago when you decided Sarah was more important than me. Now you get to find out what your choices actually cost." I got in my car and followed the moving truck to my new apartment, leaving them standing in the parking lot of an empty home, finally understanding the price of their betrayal. The new place was smaller but brighter, with large windows that caught the afternoon sun. The movers worked efficiently to unload and place everything according to my floor plan. My couch looked different in the new space, more elegant somehow. My dining table fit perfectly by the window. My grandmother's dresser looked dignified in the bedroom, no longer sharing space with reminders of deception. As I unpacked boxes and arranged my belongings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the absence of the constant low-level anxiety I'd been carrying without realizing it. No more wondering why David seemed distant. No more making excuses for Sarah's strange behavior. No more living in a house built on lies. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the apartment. Texts from both of them, ranging from angry to pleading to desperately apologetic. I read them once, then blocked both numbers. There was nothing they could say that would change what they'd done, nothing they could offer that would repair what they'd broken. David found other ways to contact me, emails that I deleted unread, messages through mutual friends that I politely declined to engage with. He showed up at my campus once, waiting by my car after class, looking haggard and desperate. I walked past him without a word and had security escort him off the property. Sarah tried harder. She wrote actual letters, pages of explanation and apology, and promises that she'd end things with David if I'd just talk to her. She contacted my family, my other friends, trying to build a case for forgiveness. She even sent flowers to my new apartment, though I never figured out how she got the address. I threw the flowers away without reading the card. The hardest part wasn't the anger. Anger was clean, purposeful, energizing. The hardest part was the grief. Mourning not just the relationship with David, but the friendship with Sarah. Mourning the version of myself who'd been naive enough to trust them both completely. Mourning the future I'd imagined, the plans we'd made, the person I'd thought I was going to become within the structure of those relationships. But grief, I learned, was finite. It had boundaries, an endpoint, a natural conclusion. Every day I woke up in my new apartment, surrounded by my belongings in spaces they'd never contaminated, I felt incrementally stronger. Every day I didn't hear their voices or see their faces, their power over my emotional state diminished a little more. 3 weeks after the move, I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store. Jessica, a girl from my program who'd hung out with our group occasionally, who'd probably heard some version of the story by now. "I heard about David and Sarah," she said carefully, like she was testing dangerous waters. "I'm really sorry. That must have been awful." "It was," I agreed, "but I'm doing better now." "I have to ask," she glanced around like we might be overheard, "is it true you took all the furniture?" I considered my response carefully. I could downplay it, make it sound like a coincidence or a misunderstanding. I could explain the practicalities, the receipts and ownership and legal right to my own belongings. I could defend myself against the implication that I'd been somehow unfair. Instead, I smiled. "Every last piece." Jessica's eyes widened. "Even the bed?" "Especially the bed." She started laughing, a shocked, delighted sound that made me realize I was smiling too, really smiling for the first time in weeks. "That's brilliant," she said. "Absolutely brilliant. I hope they're sleeping on the floor." I shrugged, but inside I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Let the story spread. Let people know that actions had consequences, that betrayal came with a price. Let David and Sarah explain to everyone why they were starting over with nothing but his gaming chair and whatever cheap furniture they could afford on their own. That night, I called my sister and told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting, making appropriate sounds of outrage and sympathy, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "Really okay?" I looked around my new apartment, at my furniture arranged exactly how I wanted it, at the life I was building on my own terms. "Yeah," I said and meant it. "I really am." "Good. Because honestly, what you did was perfect. They deserved worse." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. The furniture was enough. They'll remember this every time they try to furnish a new place, every time they realize how much of their comfort came from what I provided. That's its own kind of justice. It was true. I'd taken more than furniture when I moved out. I'd taken their ability to pretend their betrayal was victimless. I'd taken their comfortable denial about the life they'd been living at my expense. I'd taken their assumption that I would quietly absorb their damage and continue providing for their comfort while they destroyed my trust. Most importantly, I'd taken back my own power. I'd stopped being a victim of their choices and become an agent of consequences. I'd shown them, and myself, that I was worth more than their casual cruelty, that I deserved better than their lies, that I was strong enough to walk away from people who didn't deserve me, taking everything I'd contributed to their lives with me. 6 months later, I heard through the grapevine that they'd broken up. Apparently, the guilt and stress of the situation had poisoned their relationship, made it impossible for them to trust each other. Who could have predicted that people willing to betray their closest relationships might not make reliable partners for each other? I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no vindication, no renewed anger. Just a mild interest, like hearing about the weather in a city I'd never visited. They'd become irrelevant to my life, their drama as distant and meaningless as a story in a newspaper about strangers. I was seeing someone new by then. Marcus, a guy from my graduate program who was kind and funny and treated me with the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. When I told him the story of David and Sarah and the great furniture heist, he listened carefully and then said something that surprised me. "You know what the best part is? You didn't try to hurt them. You just stopped helping them." He was right. I could have done so much worse. I could have exposed their affair publicly, destroyed their reputations, made their lives genuinely difficult. Instead, I'd simply removed myself and my contributions from their world. I'd let them face the natural consequences of their choices without my cushioning presence to soften the impact. It was proportional. It was, in its own way, merciful, and it was complete. I'd gotten my revenge not through destruction, but through withdrawal. Not by becoming someone cruel, but by refusing to enable their cruelty any longer. I'd won by walking away with my dignity intact, my belongings secure, and my future uncompromised by their betrayal. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to absorb someone else's damage. Sometimes justice looks like taking back everything you gave freely and letting people discover what their lives look like without your generosity to sustain them. I'd learned to sleep soundly in my new bed, in my new apartment, surrounded by furniture that belonged only to me. And somewhere across town, David and Sarah were learning to live with the choices they'd made and the prices those choices had cost them. That seemed fair enough to me.